Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Joel here with Dad.
And I'm Rick. What do you want to talk about today, Joel?
So we had a conversation the other day about something. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I made a joke. I said, "Yeah, you listen to believe, I listen to disbelieve." And I started thinking about my natural skeptical. I'm naturally very skeptical, and I don't know if that's a function of 45 years of hanging out in the church, or it's just I think part of it's just personality.
Yeah,
There's some personality types that are a little more disagreeable, a little more skeptical. They're not just going to take information. And it's not like you told me once that you tend to read more skeptically than you listen skeptically.
Yeah, probably.
Because
Yeah.
I remember I gave you one of my books one time and you were saying,
Yeah.
I try and read to like figure out how do I disprove this. And I thought, well, that's interesting because you don't do that when you're listening to people, but you do it when you're reading.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Probably.
There's something profound there because the funny thing is when I read a book, I read to believe it. Like I assume if somebody took the time to sit down and write this out, they've put a lot of systematic thought into it. And until they've really proven to me that the book, this is stupid. Like I was reading one the other day and I'm like, oh, this is so good. And then halfway through, he takes this wild turn of logic and I'm like, no, you don't get to do that. So anyway, all that to say, there's this tendency, I think, when you've seen some stuff go south, when you've seen things not work out, when you've had people deceive you, to get a little cynical and skeptical. And this whole month of January, I've been doing short little devotionals about the book of Ecclesiastes. And, King Solomon in that book of Ecclesiastes, I remember the first time I read that book asking somebody about it, and they said, oh, that's King Solomon in his fallen state. And I believed that for a long time. I don't think it's King Solomon in his fallen state anymore. I'm convinced it's King Solomon with a pure, unadulterated, no filter perspective on the realities of the world. And I think he's saying, here's the realities under the sun. But it can sound really cynical at first glance. So how do you avoid cynicism? I'm still working this out, so I don't know. How do you avoid cynicism without being a fool, like just falling for anything, but also recognizing the negative realities around you? Because I think a lot of people just kind of choose willful blindness.
Yeah.
They just choose to ignore negative realities around them. And they say, well, I'm just staying positive. Or like, no, actually, you're choosing to ignore some really important things. But not being cynical. And maybe there's no perfect line. But what's your take on it?
Well, obviously, a lot of it is part of personality. There are those who tend to always look for the sunny side of life, and always looking for the lemonade in the lemon or whatever, and there's others who, no matter what happens, something's wrong, And so some of it is that. But on the one thing, I think, skepticism is not a fruit of the Spirit, first of all. So
wait, what?
So
love, joy, peace, skepticism, kindness,
yeah,
goodness.
it's not a fruit of the Spirit. I was thinking about it. It's kind of like salt. You need a little of it. It flavors the food. It's healthy for you. A little of it is healthy for you. But if the food starts to taste like salt, then you've got too much. And if everything is salty, then you don't even like the flavor at all. And so it's kind of the same way. It's good to have a little skepticism, but in our society, I think it's touted as too much of a virtue, because if you're always skeptical, you're going to find yourself very lonely. People don't like to be around people who are always skeptical, and you always have to prove to them everything you say, because they doubt everything. And cynicism kind of goes with that a little bit.
I guess we should define cynicism. I think of cynicism as just a negative taint to everything you see.
Yeah. I kind of see it as embittered skepticism.
Ooh, embittered. That's a heavy word.
I mean, I don't know if that's, it just seems to me like cynicism seems to have a bitterness with it. Like, everything's, I don't like anything, don't like anybody. Everybody's out to get me.
Everybody's got an angle.
Yeah. Everybody. Yeah. So, so you do need a little of it, but it's kind of tainted too much, because here's the problem with having too much cynicism. If you don't believe anything, I think of Chesterton's fence. G.K. Chesterton talked about, if you see a fence and you don't see any purpose for it, you don't see any reason for it, don't tear it down until you give it a while.
Right. He said, before you remove a fence, figure out why they put the fence there.
Because there was some reason somebody put it there. And maybe that reason has passed away, but maybe not. Maybe every 10 years a herd of buffalo come through there or something. I don't know, But in the same way, we when we are too cynical and everything has to be proven to us, then all of a sudden we become the ultimate purveyor of truth or whatever, and we maybe put a little too much confidence in our own little limited scope of experience and abilities. Because, well, I don't believe that. You have to prove that to me. Well, I can't really prove to you some things, but there are some things that are just, they are true, whether I can prove them to you or not. Does that make sense?
That's an uncomfortable bent to put on it, because basically what you're saying is skepticism is a bit prideful.
Yeah.
Because it's saying, no, I've got the right angle on this, and
Yeah.
I know there's nothing good here.
It can be that way. I mean, you can just be skeptical because, well, that doesn't sound very reasonable. I mean, you don't want to just be gullible, so you will swallow everything. Because Proverbs talks about the simple man believeth everything. So you don't want to be a simple person that whatever they tell you, well, that must be true because they told me that. But on the other hand, when you're skeptical of everything and you don't trust anybody, you're going to find yourself pretty much on an island alone, because sometimes people just aren't going to take, it's not worth trying to prove to you that there's a reason for this fence being here. Just let you suffer the consequences of it.
I'm going to push back on that, my skeptical mindset, because sometimes I don't care about being alone because I've found the masses are wrong most of the time.
Well, that's biblical, actually.
Yeah. So I go, well, I know everybody thinks this, but that's because everybody's cowards and I don't agree with them. So, and I realize that most of the time the masses are wrong about things, but yet sometimes the masses are right. So it's very tricky, but to say, well, you're going to find yourself isolated and alone. Well, maybe I don't want to hang out with those people because they're all fools, right?
Well, yeah, but it's one thing about what the masses believe, and there's another thing about what is sort of moving that ancient boundary stone.
Yeah, right.
And I think maybe that's what we're talking about. The difference is, biblically, the majority was usually wrong. The majority wanted to go back to Egypt. The majority is usually wrong biblically.
Majority wanted a king, and God's like, you don't want a king.
Yeah.
No, we want a king. Trust me, you don't want a king.
I'll give you one.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a king, fine, but then don't call out to me and ask for help when you picked the guy you waned.
Yeah, so we do find that the majority is typically wrong because the majority is not listening to the Lord and following and obedient. But there are those ancient boundary stones, and that's where I say I think today we are taught to question everything. Just because they've done this for 100 years doesn't mean it's necessarily right. And that's true, but it also doesn't mean that you're going to understand why they did it for 100 years until you stop doing it. And then down the road you go, oh, now I see the problem.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the reason they did that.
So the verse that comes to my mind is Proverbs 4:23. He says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it.
Yeah.
So basically the idea that your heart is this stream that you want to keep it pure so you can see clearly through the waters there. If there's junk in it, you're always going to have a tainted view of things. Tainted, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting too. He says, keep your mouth free of perversity, keep corrupt talk from coming from your lips, which is, I think, a function of cynicism and skepticism sometimes is you're going to have this negative angle. I remember one time I was, I had started working this morning shift, really early morning shift with this one lady, and we always had a break at the same time. So we were always in the break room, and she just hated the company we were working for. She hated management, and she would talk negative. And so I sat around that, right? And I started thinking, yeah, they do that. And a friend of mine, when I went back to the night shift, I was sitting in the break room, and I was talking to her one day, and she just picked up her lunch and walked out. And I was like, what are you doing? She's like, I don't know what happened to you, but you're so negative and cynical about everything now. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I realized being around that had polluted that stream, her negativeness. I mean, she saw everything negatively about the company, but there were so many good things about it that I refused to see. But I had picked that up, and I couldn't even see clearly. And I remember it took a couple months for me to go,
wait a minute,
clear my head, like get that water flushed out, and realize, not everything was negative there. But that fits with that because. And maybe that's where, your words betray you, young Skywalker, right? Maybe it's, or is it your thoughts betray you? I don't know, but your words betray you. Maybe is everything coming out of your mouth negative, untrusting? Well, I don't know. We'll see about that. Maybe that's the sign that the source has been polluted.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Jesus, there's a passage which I think the skeptic could use to justify his cynicism and skepticism. It says that Jesus he didn't put his trust in man because he knew what was in the heart of man. But if you read that in context, because you could read that and you go, oh, well, you see, therefore I don't have to trust anybody because Jesus didn't trust anybody because he knew what was in their heart, you know. But if you put that in context, it says beforehand that he did miracles. I think it was in the temple. He did these miracles. And so many put their hope in him, put trust in him because of the miracles. But he didn't put his trust in them, meaning that group. There were those that he put his trust in the disciples. I mean, he entrusted Judas, got stabbed in the back, with the purse Judas stole from him. He entrusted him with the secrets of the kingdom, even though he knew Judas was going to turn on him. We assume he knew that. And so the point is, he didn't entrust himself to those who he knew that their only motivation was the miracles. But that's not to say he didn't entrust himself to anybody. You have to read it in the context of that.
And I mean, that's an element of trust is like, I'm going to trust, and which is one of the challenges we live in a world today. A lot of our social structures, things we were told to trust, have really been corrupted.
Yeah.
And you look at that and you go, I don't know, is it foolish for me to trust those systems anymore because they've been corrupted, and you would be a fool to just blindly believe it.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. When you put your hope and your trust, and not your hope, because that's different, but when you trust people and when you get in relationships with people, you're going to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. You're going to be hurt. You're going to get your toes stepped on. You're going to be offended. But that's the price for humanity. That's the price for living as a being, because you're going to be hurting other people as well. And I think that's the thing that helps me, is I realize if I remember my own flawedness, my own failure and all that, and how much I probably disappoint other people, just talk to your mom. Then just ask. Then it helps me when people disappoint me, when people stab me in the back, betray me, do whatever. I go, it's coming out of their own, usually coming out of their own insecurity that happens, that they betray you, that they stab. And I just kind of go, well, that's who they are. That's what they are. And
so you've always erred on the side of trusting.
Yeah. Even though I know I'm going to get, I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to be stabbed in the back. I'm going to be betrayed. That's just a part of human nature. But so I have the choice. I can either be skeptical of everybody and always live on edge, or I can just go ahead and put my hope, and not your hope, because your hope's only in the Lord. I mean, He's the salvation. But you can put your trust in people, and you can share with them, and to various levels, and knowing that, hey, there's going to be times I'm going to be betrayed. There's going to be times they're going to disappoint me, but that's just humanity.
Yeah. Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote a book. I read it a while back. It's called Talking to Strangers, where he talks about this need for cohesion in a society. You have to have a default to trust. Yes. Which means I'm trusting that you're going to give me, as we do this transaction, I'm trusting you're not going to burn me. And you have to default to that. And I read another book called The Geography of Bliss. And what was interesting, they talked about the most unhappy country in the world, which is Moldova. And he basically concluded that Moldova is the most unhappy country in the world because nobody defaults to trust. They almost prize being able to undercut someone, deceive. Yeah. So there's this lack of trust of everyone. And he says actually that lack of trust is what leads to Moldova being the most unhappy country in the world. And it fits right in line with what Gladwell said, basically, is that for a society to be a civil society and function, we have to default to trust. But he also said it's really important that there be some people in the mix who are skeptical. One of the stories he mentions is a guy that says, and it's that disagreeable nature in there's the big 5 personality traits: agreeableness versus disagreeableness. Disagreeableness is kind of like, I'm not just going to believe you. But he says that there was a guy that predicted, was it 2009 when everything kind of tanked, the crash or whatever. The real estate bubble and all that, the subprime lending crisis. There was a guy that was like literally shouting from the rooftops, this is going to happen. Nobody listened because everybody else was just, again, the masses blindly going along. But he said if people would have listened to him, it would have avoided them a lot of pain. So it's this idea of filtering out, like we may not want to hear negative, but sometimes the skeptic has something really valid to say and we listen to it. We fail to listen to it at our peril.
Yeah, well, of course, there's always somebody predicting the stock market's going to crash tomorrow anyway, and then, I got it right.
That's the problem with the naysayers, is they're always at some point going to come out right. Like, the stock market's going to tank 15 years from now. He's like, I told you.
Told you so, yeah. I remember when we were leaving Guatemala, I had a bunch of videos, and I thought, before I throw these away, I need to see if there's anything on them important. And I started watching this one. It was some guy predicting this coming year, there's it was a Christian prophet,
Yeah.
and he was predicting this coming year the market's going to crash and that we're going to have everything's going to change in the financial realm. And I thought, oh my goodness, I better get ready for that. I looked at it, it was like a 3-year-old tape. I go, it happened and I totally missed it. Gee, it really was a terrible crash. So yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah. So it brings me back to something. You mentioned another podcast, and is what got me thinking about this whole line of thought. There's a verse where it says this. It says, "Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place?" It's Psalm 24:3. And the answer is, "He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully, he will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation." I kind of, somewhere in there, keeping a pure heart is the key, where it's also like you're not just, it says you're not just giving in to what's false, right? It says he doesn't lift up his soul to what is false. You don't just surrender yourself to everything. If it's a lie, you don't surrender. But also this idea of, I'm going to keep my heart open and pure. I guess that's really where the Holy Spirit comes in. There is no formula. You have to listen to the Holy Spirit's guidance on truth. You have to have counsel around you. Otherwise, we are prone to falling for deception. If we're more naturally believing, right? I'm not, right? I need people around me to go, hey, you need to let down your guard a little, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And a good example might be of the balance of those two is like at a traffic light. A society can't survive if everybody's skeptical and everybody's expecting the worst. So if I come up to a traffic light and I've got the green and I'm going to stop because I know somebody's going to run that red one over there, so I'm going to stop and look around. So I don't stop at every green light. But on the other hand, when I do proceed through it, I'm keeping my eyes on both sides just to see in case there might be somebody. So it's kind of keeping your eyes open, expecting the best, expecting everybody's going to stop, but also keep your eyes open in case there is somebody who's ready to stab you in the back there.
Thanks for listening. Please consider sharing this with your friends on the platform of your choice. For more from Joël Malm, visit joelmalm.com. For more from Rick Malm, visit rickmalm.com. Our podcast music was produced by Alex Burleson.